I was wrong about McLaren in 2023. The team have proved so many people wrong with their recent updates, and they've propelled themselves up the F1 order. McLaren made a big change coming into the season by dropping Ricciardo and taking on Piastri, and it seems like they are reaping the rewards from that decision. So how has McLaren progressed so quickly? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. A tough start. McLaren's 2023 season did not start well. The team admitted that they had missed their aerodynamic efficiency targets coming into the start of the season, and that meant that the team could not add more downforce without adding significantly more drag, and so would be off the pace at the start of the season. This was the second year in a row where that was the case. Last year, when the new regulations began, the team struggled with brake temperatures in hot conditions and almost didn't even finish the first race in Bahrain, but they very quickly recovered and made good progress to get back into the midfield. This season was very similar. The team struggled with poor aerodynamic efficiency, and they had a best finish of 15th over the first two rounds of the season in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. This was disappointing, and it seemed like the team had gone from a midfield setup in 2022 to a backmarker in 2023. The team were discussing an upgrade package due to arrive in Azerbaijan that Norris described as being the car that they should have had at the start of the year. This late arrival was attributed to the fact that the team changed their development direction when designing their new car, which is understandable and actually a great thing to see. Whenever a team identifies a more promising development route, it is worth going all in on that approach, particularly when early on in a new regulation set. This is particularly emphasised by the limits on aerodynamic testing and the new cost cap in the sport as well, which means development budgets are severely limited. The floor upgrade that arrived in Azerbaijan was positive, and the drivers seemed happier in the car with an increase in their pace. But to this point in the year, McLaren was still very much in the midfield. With Aston Martin making significant progress in the off-season, they probably only got back to 6th in the pecking order, with Alpine still ahead of them as well. This was a step in the right direction, but still not what you'd expect from the McLaren team, which is one of the most successful F1 outfits in history. This lacklustre start to the 2023 season was a worrying sight. The team had failed to hit the ground running for a second time in a row, and it suggested that they were continuing to struggle in terms of their infrastructure and their team personnel. At this point, it seemed like Lando Norris in particular was a bit disappointed. He continued to have faith in his team, but there was a level of frustration for the driver that his team hadn't given him the car he expected and wanted from the start of the season. It was easy to make comparisons early on in the season between McLaren, Alpine and Aston Martin. The progress that the Aston Martin team made through the off-season was impressive to say the least, and they managed to break into the top teams, which is something that McLaren had been trying to do for several seasons with little success, outside of when Ferrari had their dreadful season in 2020. But there was light on the horizon for McLaren. Their new development direction gave them room to develop further, and the aerodynamic efficiency challenges faced early on in the year were behind them. But before we look at McLaren's rapid progress, I want to ask you to subscribe to Behind the Drive. Currently, almost 3/4 of you watching these videos have not yet hit the subscribe button, so if you haven't already and are enjoying the videos, then please hit the subscribe button today. Rapid progress. The key update for the McLaren came for Lando Norris in Austria. The team accelerated their development timelines as they were actually due to arrive for the team at the race at Silverstone rather than the Red Bull Ring. This meant that the team only had enough parts produced for Lando Norris to receive the upgrade for that earlier race. You could see that McLaren were excited about these upgrades. To bring a whole new floor and bodywork to the car on a sprint race weekend shows their confidence in the new design. The teams were going to park Ferme rules after just a single free practice session, and this meant that they would have had limited time to complete the necessary work to check if the upgrades were working as expected. To bring this upgrade in early also shows the efficiency of the team behind the scenes. They clearly recognised the opportunity to get the upgrade onto the car early, and took the decision that Piastri would lose out on this occasion given Norris was ahead in the championship and is the far more experienced driver. This decision was sensible, and it paid off. The Red Bull Ring in Austria is a track that Norris has had success on before. He scored his first podium there in 2020, and he tends to get the most from his McLaren car at that circuit each year. This year was no different. In that race, Norris qualified 4th, a huge step forward and ahead of 2 Mercedes cars and 2 Aston Martins as well. This was excellent progression though, and a statement result from the team. In the race, Norris converted 4th on the grid to 4th at the finish, holding his position and showing that McLaren's race pace could match that of the one-lap pace as well. This was a big step forward. Norris also showed some strong one-lap pace in Barcelona earlier in the year, but even if he'd avoided the damage sustained from a first-lap incident, then it doesn't look like that car would have had the pace to compete as well as they did in Austria. Silverstone became the second test for the latest McLaren upgrade. Piastri received the significant upgrade that Norris received earlier, and the British driver also gained an upgraded front wing in addition. It was at this circuit that McLaren had their statement race weekend. The team were the second fastest throughout the weekend, and both drivers were delivering straight away with the team's new upgrades. The pair took second and third on the grid, beating everyone outside of Max Verstappen, and then in the race they ended up second and fourth, which should have been a double podium if it wasn't for a late safety car. This was a remarkable performance. It's so rare to see teams deliver such pace increase from a mid-season upgrade, and the fact that both drivers could get up to speed quickly shows how well the team understood the upgrades and how both of these drivers can adapt quickly as well. But the Hungaroring would be a big test for McLaren. The track characteristics were completely different to both the Red Bull Ring and Silverstone, and so the team would be tested in a very different way. The teams were running higher downforce for the race in Budapest, and so it would be interesting to see which team could emerge as the second fastest. In qualifying, McLaren were close once again, with Norris just a tenth of a second off pole and Piastri just behind. McLaren were behind a Mercedes and a Red Bull, but they were still completely in the hunt, showing the versatility of this new version of the McLaren. In the race, the team were clearly the second fastest team, with the McLaren of Norris able to pull away from the Mercedes of Hamilton through the race. It's clear that this progress has enabled McLaren to take a huge leap up the order, going from the sixth fastest to potentially even the second fastest team on the grid. This kind of step is incredibly rare, especially mid-season, and you could argue that it's a sign that the new stepped aerodynamic testing regulations are working. Alternatively, Alonso has been vocal in the fact that he believes that the new tyre structure introduced for the British Grand Prix could be a cause, and a reason why the Aston Martin has dropped back. Now I would argue that this isn't the reason why McLaren have improved, given they showed this pace increase in Austria, with Norris as well. But perhaps it could be a factor in why McLaren have made such a significant progress midway through the season. The team have attributed the success to the team's new structure in the technical design department, which is still a work in progress with new personnel in the technical team set to join in 2024. It'll be interesting to see the progress of the team once this new structure is fully established next season. The most likely team to beat Red Bull. The question everyone is asking in 2023 is whether Red Bull will win every race or whether one of the challenging teams will be able to compete and win a Grand Prix through the second half of the year. To this point, it's been one of the most dominant seasons in F1 history, and with the bulletproof reliability of F1 cars these days, it does seem unlikely that we'll see both Red Bulls retire in a single race weekend. But perhaps in McLaren's ability in competing on multiple circuit types means that they'll be the ones knocking on the door. Though, at the time of recording, we're yet to go to Belgium, which could be another new test for the McLaren team. What we know for sure is the fact that McLaren's new design has piqued the interest of other teams, and particularly their engine provider, Mercedes. This kind of progression is something that Mercedes have been looking to do themselves, and given the two teams are using the same power unit, they know that they could achieve these same results. The introduction of two new teams this season in the fight for second in the championship has been a fascinating change in the sport generally. Personally, I think it's great to see new teams bridge the gap towards the top teams in the sport. I would just like to see a team do it to bridge the gap to Red Bull sooner rather than later, and perhaps it could be McLaren. One of the reasons why McLaren are immediately delivering since their upgrades, and a major factor in why I believe they're the most likely team to beat Red Bull in 2023 now, is their driver pairing. Despite the car reportedly continuing to have the challenging trait that Ricciardo struggled with throughout his 2 years with the team, both Norris and Piastri look comfortable in the car. Norris has come second for 2 races in a row at the time of recording, and in both races Piastri was knocking on the door of his first podium before a safety car at Silverstone and reported damage at the Hungaroring. This is excellent, and the fact that both have got up to speed so quickly is impressive. The move from McLaren to buy Ricciardo out of his contract to go and get the most promising young driver not in an F1 seat last year has paid off so far. And it seems like if Red Bull slip up, you can be sure that Norris or Piastri will be waiting now they have the car to do so. Even if they don't beat Red Bull at a race in the second half of the season, McLaren are making excellent progress to bridge the gap to the existing top 4. At the time of recording, McLaren is still 5th in the championship and are 80 points behind Ferrari, 97 points behind Aston Martin, and 136 points behind Mercedes. Over the last two Grand Prix, they've scored more points than all of those teams. And yes, it is a small data size of only 2 races, and these teams will surely be bringing other upgrades after the summer break. But hypothetically, if the McLaren team keep up this level of performance over the other teams in the fight for second, based on the average number of additional points they scored over those teams in the last couple of rounds, they could comfortably get past Aston Martin and Ferrari, but will remain behind Mercedes based on the number of points the Silver Arrows have scored during those 2 Grand Prix. The points scored has of course been skewed by the fact that Hamilton took a podium spot at Silverstone with Perez away back in 6th, but it's all I have to go on to predict the future of this championship. As things stand, with no further development, it seems like McLaren could feasibly get to 3rd this season, which would be an incredible result given how far back the team were at the start of the year. Within all this, I still believe that the McLaren team's progress puts them in the best place to get into a position to beat the Red Bull team. But it's hard to deny the fact that Verstappen won the race in Hungary by more than 30 seconds, which shows how much of a gap the team would need to bridge if they want to return to the top step of the podium. For me, McLaren's progress has added some much needed interest into the 2023 F1 season, and their move to become one of the fastest teams on the grid bodes well for the future of the sport.